Good afternoon, students. Welcome to week 5. We are more than halfway done with this class. Can you believe it? So for your week 5 assignment, writing assignment, you're going to be writing an explication essay. What exactly is an explication essay? An explication essay, another name for explication essay, is Poetry Analysis Explication Essay. And so what you do in an explication essay is you're going to explain to the reader or what the poem is about. You're going to analyze the poem line by line and tell me what it means and what it means to you by using symbolism, metrical structure. I'll go over all of that, how you do that. And so what is an explication essay? A poetry explication is a relatively short analysis which describes the possible meanings and relationships of the words, images, and other small units that make up a poem. Writing an explication is an effective way for a reader to connect a poem's subject matter with its structural features. So this handout reviews some of the important techniques of approaching and writing a poetry explication essay and includes parts of 2 sample explications. Preparing to write the explication essay. Before you try to write your essay, you need to take these preliminary steps. First, read the entire poem. Read it out loud. Repeat as necessary. Circle, highlight, underline. Otherwise, note specific moments that has caught your attention as you were reading, and reflect on why you noticed them. These could be moments that made sense to you, or profoundly confused you, or something in between. Such moments could be single words, phrases, or formal features, such as rhyme, meter, or enjambment. Reflect on the poem and what it conveyed to you as a reader. You might not be fully able to logically describe this, but take note of what you noticed. You might consider jotting down your initial thoughts after your first reading, and then noting how your ideas changed after you reread them. The large issues. Before you really delve into the linguistic and formal elements, it's important to to get the big picture of the poem. How did the poem make you feel as a reader? Or how did the poem affect you? So the word affect can help denote the subjective, in other words, how did you react to the poem? How did it make you feel? So how did the poem make you feel? What did you think about the poem? So this what do you feel question could include thoughts, emotions, moods, ideas. Whatever the experience or poem produced in you as a person. You can ask yourself, what emotional atmosphere did the poem produce? And if something about it is difficult to describe, what adjective would you use to describe the tone of the poem? Happy, sad, thoughtful, despairing, joyous? How did the poem make you feel generally? Did the poem bring to mind certain ideas or images? Does the poem have an identifiable speaker or addressee? Is the poem attributed to a specific speaker, or is this unclear or ambiguous? Is the speaker clearly addressing a second person or a general one? Is there a specific dramatic motivation driving the speaker to speak? You may have to make decisions about how to discuss the speaker or addressee in your explication, so it's worth noticing how the poem is framed. What seems to be the larger theme or main idea of the poem? Even if the larger idea of the poem seems ambiguous, it's always important to get a sense of what the main idea of the poem is before you analyze the linguistical parts. Does the poem seem to be an attempt to understand something, to appreciate something, to express a feeling, to work through a complex idea, to convey an image, or a combination of all of these? After considering your questions, keep in mind it is okay if the poem still confuses you or eludes your full understanding. In fact, this sense of mystery can encourage further thought when trying to explicate or explain a poem. Keep thinking carefully about the intricacies of the language, and you may be able to convey some of this in your explication. So after you figure out the main idea or the themes of the poem, so for instance, after you read Shakespeare's sonnets, you realize, okay, so in this poem, Shakespeare, the poet, is speaking to the object of his love, and he's talking about romantic love. So once you get the main point of the poem, and you understand the main thesis of the poem, then it's time to delve into the details. So what kind of details can you analyze in an explication analysis? So to analyze the design of the poem, we must focus on the poem's parts, namely, how the poem dramatizes conflict or ideas in language. By concentrating on the parts, we develop our understanding of the poem's structure, and we gather support and evidence for our interpretations. Some of the details we should consider include the following: form, rhetoric, syntax, vocabulary. Form. Does the poem represent a particular form? Sonnet, sestina. Does the poem present any unique variations from the traditional structure of that form? Rhetoric. How does the speaker make particular statements? Does the rhetoric sound odd? Why? Consider the predicates and what they reveal about the speaker. Syntax. Consider the subject, verbs, and object of each statement and what these elements reveal about the speaker. Do any statements sound convoluted to you? Vocabulary. Why does the poet choose one word over another? Do any of the words have multiple meanings that add other meanings to the line? You can use a dictionary as a resource. Patterns. As you analyze the design line by line for certain patterns to develop, which provide insight into the dramatic situation, the speaker's state of mind, or the poet's use of details. So when you analyze a poem, look for patterns. In other words, what parts of Shakespeare's sonnets indicate that Shakespeare is talking about romantic love? So you could look at rhetorical patterns, you could look at the rhyme, consider the significance of the end words joined by sound in a poem. In a poem with no rhymes, consider the importance of the end words. Patterns of sound. Alliteration and assonance create sound effects and often cluster significant words. Visual patterns. How does the poem look on the page? Rhythm and meter. Consider how rhythm and meter influence our perception of the speaker and language. And then here you have a lot of examples of meters. In other words, how do we keep the beat of the, what is the rhythm of the poem? And walked within, ward glow, re-crowned, and walked within, ward glow, re-crowned. Okay, so that's known as an iambic stress. So if you're singing a song, you would also follow this pattern, except you would sing it to a melody. And walk within, ward glow, re-crowned. Okay, so I tried to sing real badly, but you get the idea of how poetry and music are intrinsically. So if you were to sing this to a melody, this would make a lot more sense. And according to the poetry analysis, the iambic pentameter is the most common meter used in poetry and in Shakespeare's sonnets. And then you have here other kinds of piping down the valleys, wild. So that's called a trochaic or trochee meter. You can have anapestic meter. The Syrian came down like the wolf on the fold. So that's an anapestic meter structure. Woman, much, missed how you, called to me, called to me. That's known as a dactylic structure. And when you learn singing, you learn a lot about these different kinds of meters, and you learn about how all of this. I think that sometime I will find a song and I will show you how this works. But anybody who's done any kind of singing would be nodding their head right now going, yes, that's exactly how it works in singing. So you can look at how the poem is written in terms of meters and which syllables get stressed and which syllables do not get stressed. This is how we determine the rhythm of the poem, and this is how we make the poem sound musical. So what we're doing is you could determine its metrical pattern by marking out the syllables. And so to scan a line is to determine its metrical pattern. Perhaps the best way to begin scanning a line is to mark the natural stresses on the polysyllabic words. Take Shelley's line, and walked with inward glory crown. And walked with inward glory. So this big line means in. It means that's where you stress, where you say the most, in. And then the short one means word. You don't say very much. Inward, glory, crown. That's where, so whenever you have a big stress on the word, we put this thing on it. And then if we have a short, when you have a long syllable or a stressed syllable, you put a line going vertical. And then when you have a short syllable, you put a horizontal line. So this is how we walked with inward, glory, crown. And so walked is a long syllable. So this takes this line, and crown, also a long syllable, takes this line, and word, read. These all take short syllables. This is how you determine the metric structure of, or the rhythm of your poem. Rhythm refers particularly to the way a line is voiced, how one speaks the line. Often when a reader reads a line of verse, choices of stress and unstress may need to be made. That's exactly what we were doing. I was reading where and walked, within, word, glow, recrowned. Okay, so that is iambic, iambic, iambic. So therefore, the line consists of 4 iambs, 1, 2, 3, there's 4 of each. And we identify this as an iambic tetrameter. And so that's why poetry has a lot of different kinds of rhythms, and just like with songs, and you can read through this, all of this, which talks about how all of this, the beautiful rhythmic sounds of poetry. We're going to go over more of that, about how poetry is related to music in week 6. Now getting back to writing your essay. So your explication essay should have a introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. And so in your introduction, you're going to write about what are the major ideas or themes of that paragraph, of that poem, okay? So the first paragraph should focus on the large issues. What is the main idea of the poem? And so the introduction should inform the reader which conflicts in the poem are dramatized and should describe the dramatic situation of the speaker. And so the explication does not require a formal introductory paragraph, but the writer should simply start explaining immediately. This poem dramatizes the conflict between, and so with Shakespeare, this poem dramatizes the conflict between the poet and the object of his desire. In the poems of Petrarch, same thing. This poem dramatizes the conflict between the poet Petrarch and the object of his desire, Laura, because I read it in French, Laura. Such a beginning ensures that you will introduce the major conflict or theme in the poem and help organize your explication, that is your explanation, accordingly. Here is an example of how you can start your essay. This poem dramatizes the conflict between appearance and reality, particularly as this conflict relates to what the speaker seems to say. What he really says, from Westminster Bridge, the speaker looks at London at sunrise, and he explains that all people should be struck by such a beautiful scene. The speaker notes that the city is silent, and he points to several specific objects, naming them only in general terms: ships, towers, domes, theaters, and temples. after describing the glittering aspect of these objects in the poem, he asserts that these city places are just as beautiful in the morning as country places like valley, rock, or hill. Finally, after describing his deep feelings of calmness, the speaker notes how the houses seem asleep and that all that mighty heart is lying still. In this way, the speaker seems to say simply that London looks beautiful in the morning. And so here the writer of your essay, when you write your essay, you can then summarize all the different parts of your essay. And so this is based on Wordsworth's Composed Upon Westminster Bridge. So this would be your introduction. In other words, you introduce your poem. And then the next paragraph should expand so here in your body paragraphs, you should expand the discussion of the conflict by focusing on details, form, rhetoric, syntax, and vocabulary. In these paragraphs, the writer should explain the poem line by line in terms of these details, and he or she should incorporate important elements of rhyme, rhythm, and meter during the discussion. So here's an example topic sentence. So here's an example body paragraph. However, the poem begins with several oddities that suggest the speaker is saying more than what he seems to say initially. For example, the poem is an Italian sonnet and follows the ABBA CD rhyme scheme. The fact that the poet chooses to write a sonnet about London in an Italian form suggests that he says may not be actually praising the city. Also, the rhetoric of the first two lines seems awkward compared to a normal speaking voice. And then he gives examples. Earth has not anything to show more fair, dull would he be of soul who would pass by. The odd syntax continues what the poet personifies when the poet personifies the city. This city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning. Here the city wears the morning's beauty, so it is not the city but the morning that is beautiful. So in your introduction, you introduce what the poem is about. In your body paragraphs, you give further evidence of what the poem is about, but you analyze the metrical system, the metrical structure, the rhythm, that sort of thing. And then in the conclusion, the conclusion, there's no concluding paragraph, but the end of the explication essay should focus on sound effects or visual patterns as the final element of asserting an explanation. So here you would write, the poem ends with a vague statement, and all that mighty heart is lying still. So here that's the last line of the poem by Wordsworth. In this line, the city's heart could be dead, or it could be simply deceiving the one observing the scene. In this way, the poet reinforces the conflict between the appearance of the city in the morning and what such a scene and his words actually reveal. So basically, in your essay, when you, instead of saying the poet says, the poet says, the poet says, you could say the poet dramatizes, presents, the poet illustrates. In other words, you can use many different verbs instead of saying Shakespeare says, Shakespeare says, Shakespeare says. You keep saying Shakespeare says and you're going to sound really boring. So you would say Shakespeare dramatizes, Shakespeare presents, illustrates, characterizes, underlines, asserts, posits, enacts, connects, portrays, contrasts, juxtaposes, suggests, implies, shows, addresses, emphasizes, stresses, accentuates, enables. So avoid saying things like Shakespeare says, Shakespeare says, Shakespeare says. So use a variety of verbs to make your explication essay more interesting. And then here you can read how this is the actual poem, and then somebody wrote, I'm not going to read it out to you, someone's explication essay. If you want to read more about it, you could go to this website. I'm going all the way up here, It's at the UNC, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and it's this website that will go over, and then you put in UNC, University of North Carolina, and then Poetry Explications, and you can read it for yourself. Now, if you have any questions about how to do an explication essay for your week 5 assignment, feel free to email me.